Thank you all for joining this month's Construction Administration Practice Group call. My name is Matthew Fox here at CSI staff, and I'm followed by our co-chairs Douglas Freeman and Jim Raines. With that, I do want to actually hand it over to Jim and Douglas to get started with today's session, as we are starting to talk about number 2 in the countdown of top 10 best practices for construction contract administration. Jim and Douglas, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us, Matthew. Let's go ahead and get started with the slides. And as everyone that has been participating knows, and for those of you that are new to the group, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having your input as we go through the slides. So in the first slide, Matthew, are they changing? I just see the introduction. There you go. So I'd like to give Mr. Letterman credit here as we set up these top 10 construction contract administration best practices. Let's take a look at the next slide. Obviously, it was very successful for Mr. Letterman, both financially and personally, and we hope that perhaps it'll be that successful for us so that our life is like his now, just a day at the beach. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll just touch a second on the things that we have covered to date. First of all, best practice number 10, which is to have fun. Gosh, it's part of the reason that we got into this profession in the first place, whether it's construction, engineering, design, architecture, whatever. We certainly enjoyed it as a part of what we're doing. Plan to have fun. Don't miss that time. Best practice number 9, remember your pants pocket. That's a discussion about quality assurance and quality control. Every firm needs to have one that is the right fit so that you do your double, triple checking before your documents leave your office. Best practice number 8, teamwork creates winners. As we all know, this is not a single player sport. We are all about team, and focusing on that will certainly make you successful. Best practice number 7, hold costs in check, is a discussion about paying close attention to your documents, particularly your specifications, and looking at change orders, pay applications, but also in getting your projects completed and opened, particularly for those retail customers. Being focused on cost for the project will certainly bring you success. Best practice number 6, admitting mistakes is ethically sound, although that's not probably what risk management or your liability insurance carrier would want you to say before talking to them. Always, always, always consult with them before having that sort of conversation. But that was a discussion about getting past the whodunit and who's at fault stage of an issue and being a part of the solutions to move the project forward. So next slide, Matthew, best practice number 5, look at and use the documents. It was a conversation about who makes up your firm. People have learned this is the way they've always done it, perhaps in a lot of different places before they joined you. So first, always look at your documents and use them while you're doing job site observations and answering questions. Don't ever assume that something is the way you think it is. Always verify that. Best practice number 4 is think about the end. We all have seen sections cut through windows and door openings, and those are really simple to do, where focus should be paid, where attention should be paid, and your focus is over in those very difficult spots of your project that are very hard to figure out, very hard to properly indicate. But it is, in fact, something you want to do rather than leaving it to those out in the field who, as we were having the conversation before, with looking at and using the documents, you don't want them doing it the way they've usually done it. You want them doing it the way you've shown it in your contract documents. And best practice number 3, timeliness is next to wonderfulness. There is a thing called momentum, and projects develop it, and you are a part of maintaining that. Momentum is important to complete projects on time, to provide responses to questions, to provide documentation, to provide money to the construction team. Don't forget about how being timely is a show of great respect. So those are numbers 10 through 3, and today we're going to talk about best practice number 2.
Jim, before you go on to best practice number 2, I just wanted to comment that Matthew did add the letter of conformance as a handout. I see it popped up there, and as we were talking last time about timeliness, one of the issues we talked about was in reviewing shop drawings and submittals that we ask for a lot of stuff that we might not necessarily need to ask for all the time. And one shortcut would be to, instead of asking for a bunch of submittal items to come through, is if you've got everything clear in your spec, that you have the contractor submit a letter of conformance that states that they are going to provide the basis of the design of the product that you specified. And during that discussion, someone, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who, asked for an example of a letter of conformance. I did not have one at my fingertips last month, but did go out and find one, and that's the Word document that Matthew added as a handout.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Doug, for getting that resource and posting it. It is something that Doug and I have seen used in other applications and saves everyone time. As Doug said, there are sometimes some things we really don't need to ask for, perhaps. So take a look at this, and thank you, Doug, for doing that. So, Matthew, these next couple of slides we'll go through quickly. Just plain listen. Best practice number 2. Let's take a look at the next one. So, you've got one mouth. This is an opportunity for you to close it. You got 2 ears. This is an opportunity for you to open them and use them in summary balance to your mouth. Listen twice as much as you talk, and you just have no idea what you will learn, particularly from the folks on the job site. We talk about this often throughout this series about the professionalism of the craftspeople that are in the construction profession and the vast knowledge that they carry and are willing to share with us all the time if we'll just take the time to listen. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. Let's go to the next slide, Matthew, and start out with the owner's expectations of us when we embark on a project. These are expectations as related to contractual documents that I have pulled excerpts from. And so one of those primary expectations is communication with our client, where they look upon us as their representative, their eyes and ears during the construction phase, and as a sort of overseer of their interests. Frequently we have clients who are not near the job, sometimes maybe only see it at extended periods, and are not there. So how can we effectively represent their best interests there if we're not listening to what's going on the job? If we're not able to ascertain what kinds of questions or issues need their input, then we've got to be attentive. And also they're looking for our advice. How can we accurately advise them if we aren't first gathering all of the information at our disposal during our visits to the job, meetings over the project, whether they're in person or online, over the telephone as we're doing today. There are many phases of our providing our service and meeting that owner's expectations that begin in our taking the time to listen. Doug, you want to add anything there as information that our clients are expecting?
No, Jim, I think you pretty much covered everything.
Okay, well, Matthew, let's take a look at the next slide and talk a little bit about how just plain listening may be a factor in part of what the contractor would expect from the design firm. And again, these are some of those expectations that are within our contractual documents with our client, not the contractor. But one of those is to be responsive and to provide information to the contractor or the constructors in a timely fashion. And they expect us to do that promptly and accurately and with complete detail. Again, how are we able to do that if we aren't listening to the questions at hand before we provide the responses? Those two little boys that weren't talking and weren't listening are my sons, and anybody on this call that has children, I'm sure, and perhaps those that are in the business of education and are around kids can attest to how sometimes the full listening is not in place. They hear what they want, and they're not sitting and listening to the entire conversation. I think we are in a time where we are moving so quickly and construction schedules are so constrained. Delivery periods are so short for a lot of different reasons. And that time taken to just ponder and listen and soak up what is occurring often is skipped. And it's something that, again, all of these best practices are things that are meant to cause us pause and think about. And if we don't consider that and we don't take the time to listen, we don't think about taking the time to listen, I think often we find ourselves in a hurry to respond. You've heard the statement that people have stopped listening because they're ready to tell you their response to what you're saying. Well, how can you do that, really? And how can we be fair to the construction side of the team if we're not fully listening to what they're proposing or what the discussion is centered around? Doug, any thoughts?
Nothing to add yet, Jim. I agree with everything that you've said thus far. Matthew, do we have anything from the audience yet?
Nope, at this point, we're still pretty quiet in the audience.
Let's take a look at the next slide then, Matthew, and one of the things that I've mentioned already, but that is worth noting and is related to the listening is asking questions. It's not expected, nor is it required for us to know everything. And often I think we are embarrassed if we don't know the answer to questions. I think we as professionals, whether that's engineers, contractors, or architects, all sorts of designers, put perhaps too much pressure on ourselves to always have an answer. And Doug talks about this frequently in other parts of presentations that I won't take away. I'll let him talk about how responsive we need to be when we're on a site. But taking the time, and a favorite word of mine is ponder, taking the time to ponder, to talk to the professionals that are on the site that are putting our projects together, gives you an opportunity to listen more and learn tremendous amounts from these professionals that are on the site. I often feel sorry for my peers that don't have a chance to spend the kind of time I have on a project site. I've learned more there than I have anywhere. And it has come from folks that have been in the profession of constructing for a very long time. Tricks of the trade, details of materials that I had never seen before but work tremendously well, and the list goes on and on. But let me stop talking and give Doug a chance here. I'm sorry, Doug.
That's okay, Jim. To piggyback on what you were saying, do take that time to ponder. Do not feel pressured either from yourself or from someone in the field to be obligated to give an immediate answer. You need to take that time to think. And I have said oftentimes, Jim, I think this is what you were referring to, a response of, I don't know, let me check on it, I'll get back to you, is a perfectly good and acceptable response when you are asked a question in the field.
That's right.
Even if you know the answer, I would advise you to take the time to verify the answer before you give the answer. I often tell young interns that when you're going in the field, that listen, hear what they have to say. If you don't know, say you don't know, tell them you're going to get back to them, get back into the office in a timely manner, get with who has the answer, whether you need to contact a consultant or a more senior staff member, and when you're talking to those folks, you need to listen to them so you can learn from them as well, and determine what the answer is and then reply back with the answer. Communication, in my opinion, is probably, or lack of communication is probably the number one cause for issues on a construction site. And when you have a project where the communication is flowing freely and openly and honestly and in a timely manner, you're probably going to have a more successful project. Any comments from anyone yet, Matthew?
Yeah, we actually have two questions. First one comes in from Joe. He's wondering, do you think it's a good idea to talk to workers versus dealing directly with the general contractor?
Let me go. You go okay. First.
I think it's okay to talk to the workers. I think oftentimes they're going to know more about what they're doing and how to do things related to their particular trade than the general contractor is going to know. Jim has often said before that the profession has changed tremendously over the years from when we first got into this profession, as to where the GCs are not doing as much work as they are managing it now. Now they're managing it, and they may not have as many of their own employees that are actually out on the site performing the work. They're subbing it out to all the different trades and subcontractors. Those guys that are actually doing the work, I think it's perfectly acceptable to talk to them, listen to them, and learn from them. You will learn a tremendous amount from those guys. Using a product that you haven't used before, that they've used multiple times, and they know how to handle it, they know the best way to install it, whether it's a product you haven't used before or detail or installation, you can learn a great deal from those people. Now, I would caution you in that if you are given direction if there's an issue on the site, you need to communicate that through the general contractor. It's the difference between chit-chatting and getting chummy and having conversations with the guys that are actually doing the work and actually performing your task as an architect. Those types of conversations need to be had through the general contractor, if that makes sense. Jim, I'm going to be quiet and let you add to that.
That's absolutely right. I think there's a very distinct difference between your listening and learning and your officially communicating. And Doug said exactly what I would have said. The thing that also happens when you're listening to to all the people that are working on the job is you are learning not only about those products and about the conditions of what's being installed, but everything else that's happening on the job. You have to be careful with that, very careful, but if you're listening, you're finding out about schedule, you're finding out about material delivery problems, you're finding out about things that perhaps, I'm not saying it's always this way, but perhaps the general contractor may not want you to have as much detail about, whether there's an attitude, a discord on the project, or the momentum is being adversely affected by one prime or another. All that is hearsay, but it's certainly information that informs you about the conditions on the job site. And so I've learned very significant, very important information just in conversations about work activities with the individual professionals that are doing it. So it's always been informative, but like Doug said, not official until you are following the paths of communication that you set up in your pre-construction and general conditions of the project. Matthew, you had another question too. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, we had two other people that are, I guess, Joe jumped in as well as Kevin. I think kind of in line with what everyone is talking here. Joe said that, some GCs are very particular about talking to their subs. And Kevin brought in, he would suggest that if the contractor learns of discussing matters with workers and objects, the AE should conform to their wishes. But then we do have an additional question here that came in from James saying, when an owner is putting pressure in the preliminary stages of a project and as a general contractor needs to evaluate moving fast or losing the account, any advice?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I'll reword it the way I think I understand it, and James, feel free to type in if I get it wrong. But it sounds like he's a general contractor who's being given pressure from the owner in the preliminary stages of the project to either move fast or potentially lose the job. And maybe that includes moving faster than he would recommend as a general contractor. So if there's any advice you think related to that, whether it be, I guess, meeting the speed that the owner is putting on you versus the speed that may be required in order to complete a project. Oh, so James jumped in here saying that there's incomplete plans and no specs that are approved at the same time. So that adds in a little bit more concern as the general contractor, essentially, in that he doesn't really even have all the information needed, but it sounds like the owner is still pushing to get some of the initial work started.
Well, let me go. I want to answer that with sort of kind of lightheartedness and let Doug straighten me up and clean me up here, but so not only does that owner want you to be a contractor, but you're also going to be a magician, because you're expected to figure out something that doesn't exist and make it happen. I think the first thing I would say seriously is that that seems like a warning bell to me with that particular client, that if they would ask you to undertake something like that, that perhaps there's more to follow that wouldn't necessarily be to your advantage. I also might think it may be an indication of how much of the project schedule has been used up in the design process. Firms I have been at have been guilty in using that time up and then trying to pass that on to you as a contractor, which is just not acceptable, but has happened sometimes. So I don't know, Doug, I'll hush.
Well, I would suggest that you take the opportunity to educate the owner as to what the consequences are for proceeding before you have the information that you need to proceed. And I would suggest that one way of doing that would be to talk to the architect and let the architect and the contractor together go to the owner and explain the situation. He's likely going to incur additional costs. There's likely going to be work that has to be removed and reworked. Which is going to impact his schedule even more, and this is going to take longer. And you don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse, to use an old cliche. It's just going to cause issues for everyone going forward, and I think you need to just try to relay that to the owner, educate them, and if they get it, then great. If they don't, at least you've advised them, and when you have to turn around and tear something out, and you don't necessarily want to turn around and say, see, I told you so, but you can have documentation that you had a meeting and you discussed these issues so that you will have at least some backup to any additional time or cost requests that you might be entitled to. I would think that most architects, if not all, would be willing to have those joint conversations with the owner, because there's often times that the schedules that the owners try to force on the architects are unreasonable. And the architect's under those same pressures. Do I go ahead and do this and release the documents before they're ready and expose myself to some error on omission claims, or do I walk away from the job? So depending on the delivery method, it may be easier if it's a design, bid, build. It might be more difficult than if it was help me at one of my...
Design build.
Thank you. So, and then design build, it might be an easier conversation to have with the architect and the owner together, architect and contractor together going to the owner. But I think you would need to try to educate your owner, and then if he doesn't get it, then that's a business decision that you're going to have to make.
It's great advice, Doug. Great advice. Matthew, any other questions?
Nope, at this point that covers the comments and conversations that have come in.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the next slide, and this is right along with what we've been discussing here, is that there is such an opportunity to just ask, what would you do in a case like this? And then just be quiet. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Silence is often difficult for people to sit through, but there are so many things that are similar in the sequence and the process of construction that people who do it full-time for a living out in the field have learned. And I can't tell you the number of general contractors who has said to me, you know what, you're the first person to ever asked me what I would do. I'm always being told what I should do, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what my solution might be. And in fact, I've had them say, I knew how to fix this, but I was just waiting to see if you were going to be smart enough to listen. And I know Doug's had the same experience. So it's something that we need to stop and take the time to do. And let's transition to the next slide. And Doug, I'll give you a chance to add anything to that.
Jim, just repeating what you said in reference to that previous slide is, I don't know how many times I've been sitting with folks around the table trying to figure out a solution, and then someone that was totally unrelated to the project or problem, or a different subcontractor, somebody walks up and they look at it and they bring in that fresh perspective and say, well, why don't you just try this? And that may not be the ultimate answer, but it could lead you to the right answer. So again, listening and being open to the input from everyone.
That's right. Well, this is I take a personal moment here. This gentleman in this photograph is William Boney, who was my mentor for pretty much everything I learned good about the practice of architecture and about the construction administration component of that practice. This is a picture, this is taken back in the day of Piedmont Airlines, for those that may remember it. This was a flight simulator. Mr. Boney was a pilot, not for Piedmont, but just for himself, and he had an opportunity to go play around in one of their simulators, and this is a picture of one of his happiest days. But I show this to say, first, if you are able to do it, and you can have any influence in this, find a mentor and attach yourself to them, and don't let them go until you have absorbed every single possible thing that you can. When you're with them, be quiet and just listen. I was very fortunate to work at a time in North Carolina where we didn't have a lot of interstate highways, and we spent a lot of time in cars getting from where our office was to our projects. And those were the most valuable hours that I ever spent in listening to Mr. Boney talk about the things that he had done in his past, the solutions that he had been happy with when he came up with them or when others came up with them, the solutions that he was very unhappy about that he would never do again. And so the point here is that there's so much to learn if we'll just shut the noise out and listen. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have anything in the car but us. Maybe a little music to lower the discussion, but find a way to get back to that and find a way to listen to what your mentor has to share with you, because it's just incredibly valuable information. Doug?
Nothing to add, Jim. We're over halfway through our time and not halfway through the slides, so let's keep moving.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's take a look at the next one, Matthew, and see if there are any questions. And I'm just going to tell you, when you are having the opportunity to work on a project of this scale, you definitely want to have had a lot of time listening to someone who's been in the trenches, who's been on a project and dealt with problem issues of the grandest magnitude. Here is not where you want to cut your teeth in learning or in listening. You want to have done a lot of that before you get to this point. And those experienced members of your firms, and it doesn't have to be in your firm. It can be in your local organization, your professional organization. It's one of the wonderful things that CSI provides to its membership in these very kinds of opportunities. So It doesn't necessarily have to be someone you work with each day to be able to mentor you into dealing with problems on this kind of scale. But Matthew, let's look at the next slide. Also, just as importantly, pay attention and listen to the young people in your firms. They too can be mentors. Among the many talents that they have might be the computer savviness that they can bring to your firm or to you as an individual. Now, I apologize. There are a lot of tech-savvy, seasoned mentors out there, older folks, so I don't mean to take anything away from them with this slide, but you certainly have opportunities with young professionals in your firm who can show you things that will make your head spin and come up with answers on an instant basis. Listen to them. Take the time to push aside the technology and have some time to think through what they're able to show you. Because if we take a look at the next slide, and then we'll talk about that technological access. More and more and more, this is what we see on the job site. So not only can you, as a practitioner, learn from those young associate members in your firm, but the construction community is going to be excited about listening to them on the job site. Many of the individuals that I've worked with are not technologically savvy on the site, but they're being forced into it for a lot of various reasons. And so there's a real opportunity to set up a relationship there of mentoring with the young folks in your firm. And I say young, it doesn't have to be, but certainly is an opportunity. Doug, anything to add to that?
Not really, Jim. A quick story. I remember when I was young in my practice and was working for an older, seasoned guy, and at that time, fax machines had just come out, and I did everything I could try to do to convince him to purchase a fax machine so we could communicate with owners and contractors and suppliers by a fax machine. And he was resistant to it. And just to show how this technology has changed, I couldn't tell you today when was the last time I used a fax machine. And it just moves so quickly that, as Jim was saying, these young professionals as are coming through the education system, I would dare to say that they are exposed to more of the leading edge technology that's out there, and so you will be able to learn from them because they're going to have that exposure from the educational process probably a lot sooner than you would through your professional practice.
It's absolutely true. Matthew, any questions while we go to the next slide?
No, there was just one comment in here from Kevin. With us talking a lot about listening to people, he just wanted a reminder. Listening is important to obtaining facts, but a written record and proper written communications are essential for matters such as changes in price or time and other changes in the contract, as well as I'm trying to read it's so small on my screen. I'm not sure if I know that word. Those can be done. Those cannot be done orally.
Right. Yes. For everyone's sake, to be sure, we do not suggest any of this in place of documentation. That is a most critical piece of everything that we do, and I think this is a much more subjective thought about just taking time, and that perhaps we feel like often we don't have. And it's a great segue into this next slide. Mr. Boney, that you saw there, taught me a extremely effective site observation tool. And I'm going to share it with you right now. So you don't like that silence, do you? What's happened? Did he get disconnected? Is he muted? What's going on? I watched him go to job sites, rub his chin, cross his arms, wander around, and for 15 minutes, never speak. And what often occurred after those 15 minutes is that the foreman, the superintendent, the project manager, whoever it was that was accompanying him around the site, would start to list off all the things that they had seen before we arrived that needed to be addressed. And would actually take him to those places and say, Mr. Bunny, look here, this is something that certainly we want you to know we had no intentions of trying to hide or cover up. And as I was learning this from him, we'd get back in the car to go back to the office, and I'd say, how in the world did you see all those things in 15 minutes? And he would say, I didn't see any of them. They were so nervous after I walked around and rubbed my chin and crossed my arms, and he'd frown a little bit every now and then. They were quick to share the things that they assumed he was about to comment on. Now, that's worked for me multiple times in the past, and I didn't have to say anything. I was just listening. I was listening to what the project team was telling me as I visited the site. So don't ever think that silence isn't a strong tool in your toolbox. Doug, anything to add to that?
Jim and I have known each other for a long time, and I've heard him say that before, and it was some years ago, and I can say that I have used it, and it has worked for me as well.
That's super. Well, if we go to the next slide, as you are walking around, you will see things, whether it's signage that's not right or mistakes in handrails, some of these mistakes out of your office that drawers don't work, or dispensers are in the wrong place, or wind bracing is installed with a nail shot in the rebar. These are things that walking around you may easily see, and don't so much need to be to take so much time to ponder over. But if we take a look at the next slide, when you're walking around these sites, there's a lot that's not easy to see, and whether you can see it all or not, it seems to me I would offer for your consideration that there's no way you can see all of this. And so spending time with the superintendent, the foreman, the project manager, in wandering around and pondering and being slow to move through these spaces is a real opportunity for both of you to see things that are important to note, and to, as Kevin said, to get properly documented and corrected if that's what's necessary. So let's go to the next slide, see if we have any questions. And some of these are comments that others have made. That, without listening, I ask you again, how can we do our jobs? Well, we have many things that we're responsible for. We have many opportunities to carry out those responsibilities. First, as Kevin said, documentation is critical. in whatever copies of hard copies or electronic forms as we make site observations. There are so many softwares out there now and other opportunities to use to document projects. I have an associate who is performing services for the North Carolina National Guard, and they are using an online process to capture photos and do site reports from the site, which they are extremely happy with, and then they follow those up with supplemental information if they need to. But I just offer that to say there are so many ways now, as Doug was describing, with technology that that are available to us to do our construction administration. But one of the things is that timely information is critical, and how can we be timely if we haven't heard the supposition of the question and what it is before us that needs to be answered. So whether we use standardized forms or other types of documents, in our site reports and our correspondence and our schedules, all of these are important steps to listening and taking pause to ponder the communication reports. How can we properly document what's happening on the job? Again, if we aren't taking the additional time to stop and listen. And all the rest of it. This is not a totally comprehensive list, but submittals and test reports and pay applications and change orders, it leads us, this whole process of building 10 important steps leads us to the last one centered on communication. But a big part of that communication is listening. And I just can't stress enough the importance of that. Let's go to the next slide and see if we have any questions. There's an atmosphere of collaboration when you observe people listening to you and attentively listening to you. Doesn't that add value and give you resolution that what you're offering is important? That then whatever that conversation is about, that the answers, solutions are provided to the whole team is critical, and having everyone listen it takes that first step towards making sure that happens. So let's take a look at the next slide, and we'll stop there to talk some. Who do you think in this slide is getting real work done? These guys that aren't being paid attention to, their lackluster effort and enthusiasm. If you're not paying attention to me, why should I work hard to give you my best responses and carry us forward? Or are you being a team and paying attention and then clearly getting and showing respect through the art of listening? There is something that's really easy to do.
Yeah, that is something that I have to remind myself constantly to do, is to pause and stop and give your attention to the person that you're speaking with. Oftentimes I'll be sitting at my desk and someone will come in and want to ask me a question, and I'll be busy doing something and feel like I'm good at multitasking, and I'll tell them, go ahead, and I'm listening, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And I would need to remind myself I need to stop and engage with them so that they know that I'm engaged. That's just something that I have to work on, and it makes a difference when you are having that face-to-face engagement as opposed to trying to multitask and continue doing what you're doing, and the person sitting there wondering, did he really hear what I had to say? Matthew, let's go to the next slide, and as you do that, let's see if we have anything from the audience.
No, the audience is pretty quiet at the moment.
So this, as we are getting close to wrapping up, when you are paying attention and have that communication going at the beginning of the job, it's the honeymoon phase and everybody's happy and you're doing your groundbreaking. When you maintain that listening activity throughout the project, it helps maintain that happy, cooperative attitude and cohesiveness throughout the course of the project. So Jim, it gets you from this to, Matthew, let's go to the next slide.
That's right. Through all of the disaster. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
And once you get through all of the disasters and you're still communicating and working together, then you end up here at this with your ribbon cutting, with everybody celebrating a successful project and everybody being happy.
That's right. So Matthew, let's go to that last slide and see if there are any questions about best practice number 2, which is just plain listen. And we often ask, and will again, if there are subjects that you would like to see us talk about, undertake, we certainly would love to hear from you. We try to keep a list of those so that Doug and I can go back and try to center the topic of discussion around things that the group has pointed out. We try to listen to what you say. So I'll quit talking and say thank you very much and turn it over to Doug and Matthew.
Let me just say thank you to everyone and wish everyone a safe and happy Thanksgiving and hope to see you back in early December.